I want to ask you to do a quick mental exercise with me for just a moment.
Okay, I'm game.
So imagine you are granted an audience with the creator of the universe, and you're given the opportunity to make one single request,
Just one.
just one. And this isn't, a genie in a bottle scenario with endless wishes or clever loopholes. It's a profound, life-defining choice. What one ultimate goal would you seek after for the rest of your life?
That is a massive question.
Right. If you really pause and examine your own heart, what actually surfaces? I mean, would you ask for perfect health, like an incredibly long, pain-free life for you and your family?
That's probably the most common one people would jump to.
Yeah, exactly. Or would your mind drift toward financial security, a level of wealth that just entirely insulates you from all the anxieties of the modern world?
Also very tempting.
Or maybe you'd zoom out and ask for global peace, an end to suffering on a macro scale. Or perhaps your request would be deeply internal, just a lasting, unshakable sense of personal happiness and fulfillment.
It's a staggering question to wrestle with, honestly.
It really is. And it's the exact philosophical starting point that kicks off our deep dive today.
It is the ultimate grounding question, because it forces us to identify our highest value. Whatever you answer in that hypothetical scenario, it basically reveals the foundational core of your worldview.
Yeah.
And what is so compelling about our deep dive today is that the biblical text actually provides a singular, striking, and incredibly specific answer to this exact hypothetical.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a concept that serves as the absolute bedrock for historic Christian theology. We're talking about the doctrine of the heavenly sanctuary.
And we are drawing heavily from some masterful excerpts found in a work titled Song for the Sanctuary, The Foundation of Faith.
Right. And our entire mission over the next hour or so is to demonstrate to you that understanding the sanctuary is not some, archaic, dry, academic exercise. It's not just for theologians in ivory towers.
Yeah, not at all.
It is quite literally the architectural blueprint of grace.
So for the sake of this deep dive, I'm going to be taking the role of the curious listener today. I want to break down these monumental concepts, parse the ancient Hebrew, and really probe the practical applications.
And there are a lot of practical applications.
Exactly. I want to figure out how this highly specific ancient doctrine actually translates to your daily life, your personal worship, and those core beliefs that get you out of bed in the morning.
That's the perfect approach.
And to keep us from getting lost in the sheer volume of material, because there is a lot, we're going to use one specific chapter of the Bible as our compass, Psalm 27.
I love that we're starting there.
Yeah, we're going to use this single ancient poem to basically trace the sanctuary concept from dusty, windblown, earthly tents all the way into the cosmic reality, where historic Christian faith places Jesus ministering today.
Anchoring our entire exploration in Psalm 7 is brilliant, because to comprehend the macro architecture of the universe, we actually have to start with the micro obsession of one very specific human being.
King David.
Exactly. We must begin with David. And we have to look at his personal answer to that massive opening question you asked.
Right, is one request.
David unequivocally states his one request, his single-minded purpose in life, right in the 4th verse of the psalm. I'll just read it right here.
Go ahead.
Psalm 27, verse 4, says, "One thing I ask of the Lord, this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple."
One thing I ask. He doesn't hedge his bets at all.
Not even a little bit.
He doesn't offer a top 5 list. It's an incredibly exclusive, laser-focused declaration. But to really feel the weight of what David is saying, we have to pull back the lens and look at the brutal reality of his circumstances when he actually penned those words.
Context is everything here.
It really is. Because if you just read that verse in isolation, you might picture an aging king sitting on a plush throne looking out a palace window at a serene religious compound. But the actual historical context is wild. He was utterly destitute.
He was experiencing the absolute extreme of human vulnerability. When David composed this, he was a hunted fugitive.
Right.
King Saul, who was consumed by this paranoid jealousy, had marshaled the entire military resources of the state to hunt David down like an animal.
Like a literal manhunt.
Exactly. David was surviving in the desolate rocks and limestone caves of the Judean wilderness. So we are talking about severe sensory deprivation, physical exhaustion, sleeping in the dirt, and carrying the constant, crushing psychological weight of knowing assassins are actively tracking your every movement.
Which is terrifying.
Completely terrifying, and yet, amidst that terror, his mind does not fixate on asking God for a better sword or a larger army, or even the immediate death of King Saul. His entire cognitive and emotional bandwidth is fixated on the house of the Lord, the sanctuary.
That dual meaning of the word sanctuary becomes so pronounced in this context. Because in our modern lexicon, when you hear sanctuary, your brain probably goes straight to a wildlife sanctuary.
Like a bird sanctuary, yeah.
Right. We use the word to describe a designated place of physical safety, an untouchable refuge from predators. But within the biblical worldview, the primary definition is the literal residence, the dwelling place of the divine.
For David, those two definitions were entirely fused into one reality. He desperately required a physical place of refuge from his heavily armed enemies, and his theology taught him that the ultimate, impenetrable refuge was found only within the immediate presence of God's residence.
Which makes perfect sense when you read the next verse.
Exactly. He captures this profound sense of divine protection beautifully in the very next breath of his song. Let me read Psalm 27, verse 5. He declares, "For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret place of his tabernacle, he shall hide me."
So he views the tabernacle not just as a religious structure, but as an existential shield.
Precisely.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though.
Please do.
Because looking at this objectively, you could argue a very different psychological profile for David in this moment.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, was he perhaps just profoundly homesick? Think about it. He's isolated in a barren wilderness, entirely cut off from the cultural and religious epicenter of his people. It's incredibly common for someone in exile to idealize what they've lost.
That's true.
So could this just be a severe case of absence making the heart grow fonder? He misses the communal gatherings of the physical tent. He's lonely, he's terrified, and so he writes this deeply exaggerated, romanticized poem about the building he can't access.
That is a highly analytical and honestly entirely valid critique to raise.
It's just human nature, right?
Absolutely. If the historical record stopped at Psalm 27 and David died in those caves, historians would likely conclude exactly what you just proposed, that it was merely the poetic escapism of a desperate, lonely man.
Right.
But the biblical chronicle provides a definitive answer by showing us what happens when his circumstances drastically change.
Oh, when he actually becomes king.
Yes. Let's fast forward the narrative. Saul eventually falls in battle. David's fugitive days end. He is anointed king, he centralizes his power, he conquers the supposedly impenetrable fortress of Jebus, and establishes Jerusalem as his capital.
He stabilizes everything.
He systematically crushes the Philistine armies that had plagued his people for generations. He amasses staggering wealth, absolute political power, and total geographic security. He no longer needs a cave to hide in.
So the ultimate test of his character is whether that desperation-fueled obsession fades away.
Exactly. Does he forget about the sanctuary now that he has everything a human could possibly desire?
And based on the historical texts, his obsession actually magnifies.
It does. It borders on an all-consuming mania.
The moment he secures his own safety, his immediate pivot is toward the sanctuary.
The transition is immediate and aggressive.
Right.
Once the political dust settles, his most pressing, urgent concern is relocating the presence of God into his newly established capital.
We see that in 2 Samuel, right?
Yeah, you can read the intense narrative in 2 Samuel chapter 6. The author dedicates the entire chapter to describing the massive national logistical effort David orchestrates to bring the Ark of the Covenant, which was the most sacred central artifact of the sanctuary, into Jerusalem.
He turns it into this unprecedented national celebration.
He does, and the narrative continues directly into 2 Samuel chapter 7. We find David in verse 2 finally sitting in his newly constructed lavish palace made of imported cedar.
Let me actually read that, the 10 Samuel 7 verse 2. He summons the prophet Nathan and says, "Look, I am living in this gorgeous house of cedar, but the ark of God remains in a tent."
He is deeply unsettled. Instead of enjoying his retirement, he possesses a burning, undeniable conviction that he must construct a permanent, magnificent architectural wonder to house the presence of God.
But God's response to that specific desire is one of the most fascinating plot twists in ancient literature.
It really is a massive pivot.
Because if you're reading this as a straightforward historical narrative, you fully expect God to endorse the plan. You expect a divine stamp of approval like, "Yes, David, you have proven your loyalty. Now build the ultimate monument to my glory."
But God completely disrupts David's grand vision.
He shuts it down.
It is a stunning display of divine sovereignty layered with an almost poetic grace. The entire exchange is documented in 2 Samuel 7, verses 3 through 29, with parallel historical accounts in 1 Chronicles 17, and later reflected on in 1 Chronicles 22, verses 6 through 9.
What exactly does God say?
God issues a definitive halt to the project. He tells David, "No, you cannot build a temple for me to dwell in. You have been a man of war. You have shed much blood on the earth in my sight."
Wow.
God decrees that the privilege of construction will fall to David's eventual son and successor, Solomon. And he even points out that Solomon's very name derives from the Hebrew root for peace.
The wordplay in God's response is brilliant, actually.
How so?
Well, David is fixated on building God a literal, physical house of timber and stone. God denies that request, but counters by utilizing the exact same word in a completely different paradigm.
Ah, yes.
God tells him, "You will not build me a house, but I am going to build you a house." He means a dynasty, an eternal, unbroken royal lineage.
God shifts the architectural focus from a static building to a living generational promise.
Culminating in the ultimate king, the prophesied Messiah, emerging from David's house.
That linguistic pivot from a physical temple to a dynastic promise is central to understanding biblical theology. But what is equally revealing is how David processes this profound rejection of his life's ambition.
Think about the modern equivalent of this. Imagine a visionary architect who has spent decades conceptualizing their absolute masterpiece. They've drafted the blueprints, visualized every angle, poured their entire soul into the design.
Yeah, they're fully invested.
Then the primary benefactor pulls them into a meeting and says, "We love the passion, but you're officially off the project. We are handing the construction over to your child."
Most people would be furious.
Human nature dictates that the architect would feel slighted. They would pack up their desk, walk away, and refuse to participate in a project they aren't allowed to finish.
But David's devotion to the sanctuary concept was so pure, so entirely devoid of personal ego, that he does the absolute opposite.
He accepts the restriction, but then decides to push the boundary of what he is allowed to do to its absolute limit.
He resolves to do literally everything short of mixing the mortar and laying the physical bricks.
The historical records of his preparation are staggering to read. He channels all of his royal authority and economic power into preparing for a building he will never see completed.
He even claims divine inspiration for the architectural designs themselves. Let me read 1 Chronicles 28, verses 12 and 19. David hands over the plans, stating, "All this I have in writing as a result of the Lord's hand on me, and he enabled me to understand all the details of the plan."
So he possessed the divinely ordained blueprints.
He did.
And he didn't just stop at drafting the plans. He initiated a massive, unprecedented hoarding of global resources. Let me pull up 1 Chronicles chapter 22, because the specific numbers here are insane.
The sheer scale of the logistical operation is difficult to overstate. He mobilized the entire region's workforce and economy.
Right, look at verse 2. It details his labor organization. It says he gave orders to gather together the foreigners residing in Israel, and from among them he appointed stonecutters to prepare dressed stone for building the house of God. So he's pre-cutting the masonry.
He's getting the foundation blocks ready.
Then verse 4 highlights the international trade agreements he leveraged. It notes he provided cedar logs beyond number, for the Sidonians and Tyrians had brought large numbers of them to David.
Which was the premium building material of the ancient world.
Exactly. And he explains his rationale in verse 5, declaring that the house to be built for the Lord should be of great magnificence and fame and splendor in the sight of all the nations. Therefore, I will make preparations for it.
And then we get to the financial ledger in verse 14.
Let me read that one. He states, "I've taken great pains to provide for the temple of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, quantities of bronze and iron too great to be weighed, and wood and stone."
To put those numbers into perspective, even if we account for ancient hyperbole or differences in weight measurements, we are talking about an accumulation of precious metals that would rival the GDP of a modern nation-state.
It's industrial-scale hoarding. And if that wasn't enough, 1 Chronicles 29, verse 2 adds that he also provided onyx for the settings, turquoise, stones of various colors, and all kinds of fine pearls and rubies.
He's amassing the aesthetic finishing touches before the foundation is even dug.
That's incredible.
Furthermore, his preparations extended far beyond the physical construction materials. David understood that a sanctuary is not just a silent monument. It is a space defined by its internal life, its liturgy, and its worship.
So he structurally organized the human element with the same obsessive precision.
Exactly. First Chronicles 23 records that he established a complex roster of 4,000 gatekeepers to manage the logistics of the crowds, alongside an astonishing 4,000
Or a
musicians.
thousand musicians.
He was literally employing engineers to invent new musical instruments specifically designed for the acoustic environment of the future temple.
And he drafted the absolute top-tier talent.
Hmm.
First Chronicles 25 details how he separated 288 of the most elite, highly skilled vocalists to be strictly instructed in the songs of the Lord.
He was basically serving as the primary composer, writing the foundational hymns, which is exactly why the Book of Psalms is so heavily attributed to him.
Right. And he summarizes this lifelong, all-consuming passion in First Chronicles 29, verses 1 through 3. He stands before his people and says, let me read this. The work is great, because the temple is not for man, but for the Lord God. Moreover, because I have set my affection on the house of my God, I have given to the house of my God, over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house, my own special treasure of gold and silver.
He literally empties his personal private bank accounts into the project.
So we have established, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that David was unequivocally obsessed. His dedication was absolute.
Agreed.
But a critical theological question arises from this historical portrait. If we are asserting that the doctrine of the heavenly sanctuary is the very foundation of the Christian faith, we have to determine if David is merely an outlier.
That's a vital question.
Was he simply an eccentric, uniquely fanatical monarch with an architectural fixation? Or is this intense focus on the sanctuary a central, cohesive motif woven throughout the entire biblical canon?
When you zoom out and look at the broader text, it becomes incredibly clear that this is not a localized David thing. The sanctuary operates as the central, pulsing cosmic hub of the entire biblical narrative.
Okay, lay that out for us.
David's profound passion is simply the most highly amplified echo of a reality that other writers constantly reference. The Book of Psalms, which functioned as the hymnal for the ancient Israelites, is saturated with it. It is ubiquitous in their worship literature.
Can we look at some of those references?
Absolutely. Consider how David's contemporaries and successors viewed the sanctuary as the source of divine intervention. In Psalm 20, verse 2, the community prays for the king, saying, "May he send you help from the sanctuary."
Okay.
In Psalm 62, verse 2, the writer expresses a deep spiritual yearning. "So I have looked for you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory."
It's all pointing to that physical space.
Yes, and Psalm 68, verse 24, vividly describes the visceral public celebration of God's presence, noting, "They have seen your procession, O God, the procession of my God, my King, into the sanctuary."
And Psalm 84 is perhaps one of the most beautiful examples of this. The entire poem is a desperate longing for the courts of the Lord.
Yes.
Let me grab that. The writer is so enamored with the space that he actually expresses jealousy toward the small sparrows and swallows who are allowed to build their nests in the rafters near God's altar, simply because they get to remain in the sanctuary permanently.
It's stunning poetry, and that poetic longing is matched by profound theological clarity from other key figures, such as Asaph, who served as David's chief choir director and one of his primary intellectuals.
Right.
Asaph recognizes the sanctuary as the ultimate lens for understanding God's character. In Psalm 77, verse 13, he declares, "Your way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God?"
Meaning the methodology of God, how God operates in the universe, is visibly demonstrated in the sanctuary system.
Exactly. And we see this play out dramatically in Psalm 73. Asaph is navigating a severe existential crisis. He looks at the geopolitical and social landscape around him, observing corrupt, wicked people thriving and amassing wealth, while righteous people suffer unjustly.
The classic problem of evil.
Yes. He admits this cognitive dissonance almost destroyed his faith. He describes feeling entirely embittered and ignorant, writing in verse 17 that his confusion remained, "Until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their end."
So the sanctuary provided the paradigm shift that restored his sanity.
It did. The scholars note there are over 150 explicit references to the sanctuary in the Book of Songs alone.
And this framework predates David and Asaph by centuries.
Right.
It goes back to the very inception of Israel as a liberated nation.
It does.
The foundational directive is given directly to Moses in the Sinai desert. Let me read Exodus 25, verse 8. God issues the clear command, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them."
And when you calculate the sheer volume of textual real estate dedicated to this topic, the numbers are staggering. In the Torah alone, the first 5 books of the Bible, there are 45 entire chapters dedicated exclusively to the intricate dimensions of the sanctuary, the garments of the priests, the specific rituals, and the calendar of services.
45 chapters just on those details.
Yes.
Yeah.
And moving beyond the Torah, there are another 45 chapters in the prophets and the writings equally dedicated to it.
Wow.
To truly grasp the weight of this, you have to try and immerse yourself in the daily sensory reality of an ancient Israelite. The modern, highly individualized, internal version of religion we practice today would be entirely foreign to them.
How so?
Their entire conception of time, space, and community was anchored by the physical sanctuary in their midst. It dictated the rhythm of their existence. The piercing, unmistakable blast of the shofar, the ram's horn echoing from the sanctuary courtyard, was the soundtrack of their lives.
It ordered their whole day.
It blasted every single morning and evening to mark the daily sacrifices. It blew every week to announce the cessation of labor for the Sabbath. It signaled the arrival of the new moon each month. It rallied the entire nation for the solemn, terrifying, and ultimately liberating annual festival of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement.
And the Jubilee, right?
Exactly. Once every 50 years, it unleashed the Grand Jubilee where debts were canceled and slaves were freed. The sanctuary was not just a place they visited. It was the mechanism that governed reality.
But bridging that ancient, blood-soaked, smoke-filled desert reality to the New Testament presents a massive hurdle for the average modern listener.
I can see that.
If you are sitting in a pew today or listening to this on your commute, you might be feeling a sense of theological whiplash. The standard understanding of modern Christianity is that the cross is the absolute center of the faith. Jesus is the focal point.
Right.
So if we are claiming that the sanctuary is the central hub, are we somehow displacing Jesus? Does this heavy emphasis on ancient temple architecture detract from the work of the cross?
It's a vital tension to resolve, but the biblical texts reveal that it's actually the exact opposite. You cannot divorce the person of Jesus from the mechanics of the sanctuary. The sanctuary system is the divinely provided lexicon required to actually comprehend the cross.
The vocabulary.
Exactly. Without the vocabulary of the sanctuary, without the altar, the lamb, the blood, the crease of the cross, it's just another tragic Roman execution. The writer of Hebrews makes this explicit connection.
Let me read that. Hebrews 13, verse 10. The author states, "We have an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat."
The argument being made is that the physical cross on Golgotha is the ultimate cosmic fulfillment, what theologians call the antitype of the bronze sacrificial altar that sat in the courtyard of the earthly sanctuary.
And the theology doesn't end at the cross. The cross is the sacrifice, but the sacrifice must be applied.
Precisely. The New Testament aggressively tracks the movement of Jesus post-resurrection and post-ascension. Where does he go? What is he actively doing right now? Hebrews 8, verses 1 through 5 provides the definitive answer.
Let's read that. Now, this is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord erected, and not man.
And it goes on to mention those who serve the copy and shadow of the heavenly things. The earthly tent Moses built was merely a scale model, a shadow of the vast cosmic reality.
So the narrative arc is continuous. Jesus provides the ultimate, perfect sacrifice on earth, fulfilling the role of the lamb at the altar, and then he ascends to actively minister in the heavenly sanctuary, fulfilling the role of the high priest, applying the benefits of that infinite sacrifice to humanity.
When you focus on the sanctuary doctrine, you are inherently focusing on Jesus. You are focusing on his current, ongoing, active mediation on our behalf.
That makes a lot of sense.
And historically, recognizing this ongoing heavenly ministry became a massive foundational turning point for major theological movements. To understand the development of this doctrine, we have to look at the 19th century. This specific theological realization became the absolute central pillar of the Seventh-day Adventist movement following the events of 1844.
That period is fascinating. It's centered around an event known as the Great Disappointment. You had tens of thousands of Christians across various denominations who had meticulously studied the time prophecies in the book of Daniel.
Specifically, Daniel 8.14.
Right, which spoke of the sanctuary being cleansed or vindicated at the end of a 2,300-day prophetic period. They widely interpreted the sanctuary to mean the earth and cleansed to mean purified by fire at the second coming of Christ.
But when Jesus did not return to earth in 1844, it caused a catastrophic crisis of faith.
It forced a profound, desperate re-examination of the biblical texts. They had to ask, was the prophecy wrong, or was our interpretation of the event wrong?
And through intense study, particularly of the book of Hebrews, they realized their profound geographical error. The sanctuary being referenced in Daniel wasn't the earth. It was the literal heavenly sanctuary where Jesus was currently ministering.
Which was a revolutionary paradigm shift.
It was. One of their most influential pioneers, Ellen G. White, encapsulated the weight of this discovery by writing, "The correct understanding of the ministration in the heavenly sanctuary is the foundation of our faith."
It's the skeleton that holds all the theological muscle together. Another early pioneer of that movement, Uriah Smith, developed a brilliant visual analogy to help people grasp how central this idea really is. He compared the entirety of biblical truth to a massive wheel.
The wheel analogy is incredibly helpful. Picture a large, sturdy wagon wheel. You have the heavy outer rim, which makes contact with the road, and you have dozens of individual wooden spokes.
Okay.
Now imagine holding a single spoke in your hand. You can analyze it, admire its craftsmanship, understand its individual properties. In this analogy, a spoke represents a singular biblical doctrine, perhaps the doctrine of salvation by grace, the state of the dead, the sanctity of the Sabbath, or the promise of the second coming.
Right.
Individually, they are beautiful truths, but a loose spoke cannot bear weight and it cannot move a wagon forward. The spokes only gain structural integrity and practical utility when they are all firmly anchored into a central hub.
And Uriah Smith, and later writers like S.N. Haskell, who actually mapped this out in detailed diagrams, argued compellingly that the heavenly sanctuary is that central hub.
It is the unifying focal point where every independent truth of divine revelation perfectly connects and aligns, creating a functional, symmetrical theological worldview that can actually carry the weight of human suffering and questions.
So we have established a massive, sweeping cosmic scope here. We've traveled from David shivering in a Judean cave, dreaming of blueprints, to the daily rhythmic shofar blasts in the desert, up to the current active ministry of Jesus in the control room of the universe.
We've covered a lot of ground.
And we've seen how 19th century theological awakenings mapped this out as the hub of all truth. But for the person listening to this right now, navigating the complexities of modern life, the crucial, unavoidable question remains.
What is the practical value?
Exactly. What actual tangible value does this ancient architectural doctrine bring to your life today?
Well, the author of our source text, Song for the Sanctuary, addresses this by introducing a framework based on classical philosophy. He argues that the sanctuary perfectly encapsulates the triple star of value, the three ultimate philosophical ideals: beauty, truth, and goodness.
And he proves that David explicitly found all three of these within the sanctuary experience. Let's dissect this triad, starting with the first star.
The first star is beauty. The sanctuary serves as the Bethel, meaning the house of beauty. To see this, we return to our foundational map, Psalm 27, verse 4. Recall the very first thing David lists as his ultimate desire once he gains access to the sanctuary.
Right, he doesn't ask for a sword, he doesn't ask for political advice. He longs, as the text says, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord.
But I think we need to aggressively redefine the word beauty here because the modern English usage is often tragically shallow.
Yeah, when we hear beauty, we think of cosmetics, a visually pleasing painting, or a nice sunset. It denotes something passive and largely superficial.
So the question is, was David a hardened warrior just eager to go look at the intricate gold filigree on the lampstand or admire the expensive purple dyes in the tabernacle curtains?
Probably not.
Not in the slightest. He is not expressing a superficial appreciation for interior design. The Hebrew word David employs here is noam. It is a highly specific, deeply profound term.
Noam.
Yes, noam does not refer to static, abstract prettiness. It describes a dynamic, emotive, overwhelming beauty. It is the aesthetic experience of encountering God's actual character, his mercy, his justice, his loving kindness, and finding it so entirely lovely, so intensely pleasant, that it physically and emotionally moves the beholder to their core.
So David is longing for a visceral, aesthetic encounter with the divine nature.
He is.
It's a fascinating concept. The idea of salvation or divine encounter, not just as a legal transaction, but as an aesthetic experience. How prevalent is this specific framing of salvation as beauty in the rest of the text?
Once you understand the concept of noam, you see it woven everywhere. The biblical writers continually use aesthetic language to describe the transformative power of God. Listen to the phrasing in these verses.
Okay, I have them pulled up. Psalm 29, verse 2 commands, "Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness."
And in the historical account of 2 Chronicles 20, verse 21, King Jehoshaphat assigns a choir to march ahead of the army to sing to the Lord and who should praise the beauty of holiness.
Look at the profound promise in Psalm 149, verse 4. For the Lord takes pleasure in his people. He will beautify the meek with salvation.
So let's stop right there. He will beautify the meek with salvation. That is an incredibly rich image.
It implies that salvation doesn't just legally acquit a person. It fundamentally alters their nature, making them aesthetically pleasing, restoring the original beautiful design of humanity that was marred by sin.
It is a complete restoration of the soul's aesthetic. The prophet Isaiah utilizes this language extensively to describe the redemption of God's people. In Isaiah 52, verse 1, he cries out, "Awake, awake, put on your strength, O Zion, put on your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem."
And Isaiah 62, verse 3 promises, "You shall also be a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord."
Isaiah 52, verse 7 describes the visceral relief of hearing the gospel. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation.
And the author of Psalm 96, verse 6, anchors this all back to our core theme. Honor and majesty are before him. Strength and beauty are in his sanctuary.
The challenge, however, is figuring out how a rigid theological doctrine transforms into something genuinely beautiful.
Yeah, let's be brutally honest. Handing someone a systematic theology textbook or a rigid list of ethical rules rarely moves them to tears or inspires lifelong devotion. Raw data does not captivate the human heart.
You have hit on a fundamental truth of human psychology, and it is a truth God clearly understood when establishing the sanctuary. Correct doctrine, flawlessly articulated arguments, or perfect ethical frameworks, when presented entirely on their own, are sterile.
They engage the intellect but leave the heart cold.
Exactly. It is only the beauty of the truth that possesses the magnetic power to draw us in and sustain our devotion. God did not hand the Israelites a dry academic textbook of legal codes and theological axioms. He gave them the immersive, three-dimensional reality of the sanctuary.
The sanctuary was designed as a multisensory living pageant.
Yes, to utilize two crucial theological terms. God employed typology, which is the use of physical, historical symbols to foreshadow future realities, to point the minds of the people toward the antitype, which is the ultimate cosmic fulfillment of those symbols in Christ.
So the earthly physical tabernacle constructed in the desert is the typology, the intricate shadow. And the reality of Jesus, his sacrifice, and his ongoing heavenly ministry is the antitype, the solid reality casting the shadow.
Precisely. Consider the profound pedagogical genius of this system. When an ancient Israelite sought forgiveness for a sin, they didn't just mentally assent to a doctrine of grace. The process was deeply embodied.
Right, they had to physically act it out.
They physically walked through the camp, leading a flawless lamb. They smelled the heavy scent of burning incense, mixing with a metallic tang of blood. They heard the solemn rhythmic chanting of the priesthood. They felt the coarse wool of the animal as they pressed their hands onto its head, transferring their guilt in a tangible way. They witnessed the flash of the knife and the solemn carrying of the blood toward the veil.
It was an overwhelming, aesthetic, multi-sensory drama of salvation enacted right before their eyes.
The abstract cosmic plan of redemption was made vivid, terrifying, beautiful, and undeniable through these physical symbols.
The practical implication for anyone listening who wants to revitalize their faith is immense. It suggests that our modern worship and our engagement with theology should never devolve into a purely intellectual, sterile exercise.
That's the danger we often fall into today.
If the sanctuary is the bedrock of our faith, and the sanctuary was defined by its overwhelming multi-sensory beauty, then our personal worship should reflect that same awe. We should be emotionally moved by the aesthetic beauty of God's character as revealed in this massive cosmic drama.
Awe is the correct response. But as crucial as beauty is, an aesthetic experience alone is deeply insufficient.
Because emotions are fleeting.
Right. An emotional high, no matter how profound, will eventually fade. Beauty without a solid foundation of substance is a facade, and an emotion-driven faith will inevitably collapse when subjected to the brutal swarms of real-world suffering and doubt.
And David understood this limitation perfectly, which leads us to the next phase of his desire. So if the beauty of the sanctuary captures our heart, what happens when our brain kicks in?
Exactly.
Because eventually the music stops, the emotional high fades, and we start asking logical, hard questions about whether any of this is actually real. If we look back at our map, Psalm 27, verse 4, David did not stop at wanting to gaze upon the beauty. He follows it immediately with a second distinct objective.
He states his desire, and to inquire in his temple,
And this introduces the second star of value.
the temple of truth.
Hmm.
This is the essential intellectual counterbalance to the emotional experience of beauty. The Hebrew word David uses for inquire in this verse is bakar,
Bakar.
and much like Noam, it is a rare, weighty, and demanding word. Bakar does not mean to casually ask a passing question or to seek superficial reassurance. It implies a state of intense, focused intellectual reflection.
It's an active investigation.
It means to diligently search something out, to meticulously examine all available evidence, to cross-examine witnesses, and to engage in rigorous analysis to determine the absolute, undeniable truth of a matter.
It sounds like the language of a detective or a forensic auditor. God is essentially opening the doors of the sanctuary and inviting humanity to come inside and act as investigators.
That is the exact invitation. The sanctuary is not merely a theater for an emotional aesthetic experience. It is a summons to rigorous intellectual investigation. God is not threatened by our doubts or intimidated by our hardest questions. He does not demand blind, unthinking allegiance.
He's saying, look at the data.
He says, come into my temple, examine the records, look at the architecture of my grace, and investigate. This deep connection between the sanctuary and the revelation of ultimate truth is exactly why the great apocalyptic books of the Bible, specifically Daniel in the Old Testament and Revelation in the New Testament, are entirely rooted in sanctuary imagery.
Because apocalyptic literature, by its very definition, is an unveiling. It is a process of pulling back the curtain on history to reveal the raw, unvarnished truth of what is actually happening behind the geopolitical chaos of the world.
Yes, the book of Revelation is the prime example of this. If you read through it carefully, you will notice that John introduces every single major prophetic sequence, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls, with a specific scene located within the heavenly sanctuary.
He sees the lampstands, the altar of incense, the Ark of the Covenant.
The text is explicitly demonstrating that the control room of the universe, the central command center where ultimate truth is decreed and history is governed, is the heavenly sanctuary. And this brings us to a profound and sobering theological concept that we touched on earlier, the investigative judgment.
This is the idea that the sanctuary isn't just a place of passive forgiveness, but of active, meticulous justice.
Correct. The biblical text points toward a massive cosmic legal proceeding currently underway in the heavenly sanctuary prior to the second coming of Jesus. It is a period of investigation where the books of record are opened, the evidence of human lives is examined, and the absolute truth of God's perfect justice and unfathomable mercy is made transparent and undeniable to the entire watching universe.
It is the ultimate fulfillment of Bukhar.
It is.
Our source text, Song for the Sanctuary, issues a very pointed, direct challenge to the listener regarding this concept. It urges you, as an individual believer, to refuse to outsource your theological convictions.
It's a call to ownership.
Do not simply accept this grand narrative on blind faith. Don't believe it just because it's your family's tradition, or because a charismatic pastor preached it, or even because you're listening to us meticulously break it down right now. The text commands, confirm present truth, then hold it fast.
That mandate is the very essence of Bukhar. True, enduring faith absolutely requires the engagement of the mind. God invites you to open the ancient texts yourself, to meticulously examine the complex time prophecies of Daniel, to decode the intense imagery of Revelation, to trace the sanctuary motif from Genesis to the Apocalypse, and to intellectually verify the truth of it with your own cognitive faculties.
So faith is not synonymous with turning off your brain or ignoring logical inconsistencies. God actively desires us to enter the sanctuary to interrogate the evidence of his truth.
That's the beauty of it.
But let's pause and look at the triad we're building. We have beauty, which powerfully engages the heart and emotions. We have truth, which rigorously engages the mind and the intellect. That is a beautiful, holistic framework for a quiet Sunday morning service or a deep philosophical Bible study session.
But what happens on a Tuesday afternoon when the world caves in? What happens when you're abruptly laid off from your job, or the doctor gives you a terrifying diagnosis, or, much like David, someone is actively, maliciously lying about you to destroy your reputation? How does ancient temple architecture help you then?
That is the most critical test of any theology, and it propels us directly to the third and final star in our philosophical triad. We have explored beauty, we have investigated truth, and now we arrive at the absolute necessity of goodness. The sanctuary ultimately functions as the great house of goodness.
I was looking at the source notes on the specific Hebrew word for temple used here, and it mentions a fascinating ancient Sumerian root word. How does the etymology actually reframe what David is asking for?
The linguistic background is incredibly revealing. The standard Hebrew word for temple is hekel, but linguists trace this word back to an ancient Sumerian term, agal, which literally translates to great house.
Great. This specific term is utilized over 200 times throughout the Old Testament to define God's sanctuary. It is not just a building. It is the great house of God's boundless goodness. Because your critique is entirely accurate. If the sanctuary doctrine is merely an aesthetic feeling that fades, or a complex intellectual puzzle that requires a theology degree to solve, it is utterly useless when the bottom drops out of your life.
Right.
It must offer tangible, practical goodness in the face of suffering.
And we can see exactly how David applied this practically to his own terrifying crisis. He's composing Psalm 27 while actively hiding from an elite military force. But the physical danger isn't his only problem. The psychological torment is worse.
Much worse.
These people aren't just trying to assassinate him. They're engaging in a coordinated character assassination. They are spreading vicious lies, framing him as a treasonous rebel. He's completely powerless to control the narrative. He desperately needs real-world, tangible intervention. Listen to the raw plea in Psalm 27, verses 5 and 6. I'll read it. For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion, in the secret place of his tabernacle. He shall hide me. He shall set me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me. Therefore I will offer sacrifices of joy in his tabernacle. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises to the Lord.
And if we skip down to the concluding verses of the psalm, we witness the full depth of his anxiety colliding with his ultimate resolution. In Psalm 27, verse 12, the desperation is palpable. Do not deliver me to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such as breathe out violence.
He is cornered by lies.
And then the massive pivot in verse 13, I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living.
The goodness of the Lord. There was the third star. David is surrounded by malicious, perjuring witnesses who are literally breathing out violence, actively conspiring to end his life and ruin his legacy. In that moment of total vulnerability, he requires two very specific, very practical deliverables from the great house. He needs immediate physical protection, and he requires ultimate, undeniable vindication.
Let's utilize a modern legal analogy to fully grasp the magnitude of how the heavenly sanctuary provides this exact goodness for us today. We discussed the concept of the heavenly investigative judgment earlier. I want you to imagine a high-stakes Supreme Court case.
Okay.
A massive coordinated campaign has falsely accused an innocent person of a horrific treasonous crime. The media has dragged their name through the mud, their career is ruined, their family is alienated, and they are facing a terrifying sentence. They are sitting in the courtroom entirely powerless.
The ultimate worst-case scenario.
Now, imagine the absolute highest court in the land, possessing all the evidence, not only issues a not guilty verdict, but releases a comprehensive, fully transparent public ruling that completely exonerates the defendant, proves their unimpeachable character, and simultaneously exposes the elaborate lies and malice of their accuser.
Oh.
The overwhelming flood of relief, the absolute restoration of their honor, that indescribable weight lifting off their shoulders is the truest definition of goodness.
So it's not just a pardon. A pardon implies you actually committed the crime, but the governor is mercifully letting you off the hook. This sounds more like a complete overturning of a wrongful conviction, a total restoration of status.
It is absolute cosmic vindication.
Yeah.
The heavenly sanctuary is the ultimate courtroom where God's people and ultimately the character of the Messiah himself are completely and eternally vindicated against the false, malicious, character-assassinating charges of Satan.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
In the grand narrative of the cosmic conflict between good and evil, Satan operates as the ultimate false witness breathing out violence. He accuses humanity of being unredeemable and accuses God of being an unjust tyrant. The sanctuary is the mechanism where God publicly answers those charges. It is where he declares, no, the blood of the Lamb is sufficient. These people are mine. My grace is just. They are protected and they are vindicated.
And when a human being truly comprehends that level of unmerited goodness, when you realize you've received that total cosmic exoneration, The natural psychological response is an explosion of celebration. You can't just sit quietly with that information,
You literally can't.
which explains David's response. Back in verse 6, anticipating this vindication, he declares, "Therefore I will offer sacrifices of joy in his tabernacle. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises to the Lord."
This reaction introduces a vital theological term that we must reclaim, doxology, which translates to a spontaneous, overwhelming expression of praise and glory. Far too often, modern Christianity reduces the sanctuary doctrine purely to soteriology, the dry, mechanical study of how exactly we get saved, or to eschatology, the obsessive mapping out of end-time timelines, arguing over charts, prophetic beasts, and the translation of obscure Greek words.
He gets so bogged down in the mechanics.
But David violently rejects that reductionism. He reminds us that the sanctuary is eternally rooted in doxology. Listen to his profound realization in Psalm 22, verse 3. "But you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel." The sanctuary is not just a sterile courtroom or a slaughterhouse for sacrifices. It transforms into a palace of unbridled praise.
It becomes the epicenter where the sheer goodness of God detonates into spontaneous, unstoppable joy.
Okay, we have traversed a massive, incredibly complex landscape so far.
We really have. We have seen the breathtaking cosmic scope, mapping the doctrine from an earthly tent to the control room of heaven. We've explored the triple stars, the knowing beauty that moves the hardened heart, the Bakar truth that rigorously engages the skeptical mind, and the Hikal goodness that provides an impenetrable shield of protection and vindication when life is actively falling apart.
Yes.
But looking at all this massive architecture begs one final, ultimate question. Is the sanctuary itself the ultimate reality? Is the intricate building, whether we are talking about the gold-plated tent in the Sinai desert or the massive, unimaginable cosmic structure in heaven, is the structure itself the point of the Christian religion?
We have finally reached the absolute pinnacle of our deep dive. The definitive answer to that question is no.
No.
The sanctuary itself, despite its massive importance, is not the ultimate reality. It is a means to an end. To truly grasp this, we have to look closely at the brilliant structural engineering David used when he actually composed Psalm 27. He didn't just write a stream of consciousness poem. He utilized a highly specific ancient literary device known as a chiasm.
All right, David structures this as a classic Near Eastern chiasm. And for those of us who are deeply conditioned by Western essays and modern speeches where the thesis is at the beginning and the massive climax is always saved for the very end, it's a great reminder that ancient writers thought differently.
Very differently.
In a chiasm, the most important truth isn't at the beginning or the end. The poem is structured like a mirror, folding in on itself. The outer edges reflect each other, the next layer inward reflects itself, relentlessly driving your attention deeper and deeper until you hit the absolute center. The center is the treasure.
It is a phenomenal architectural structure for poetry, and Psalm 27 is a flawless, beautifully executed, chiastic masterpiece. Let's peel back the layers of this poem to hear the mirror effect in action. We'll start from the outside edges and slowly work our way to the center.
Okay, let's map it out.
On the outermost layer, which scholars label the A sections, verses 1 through 3 are entirely focused on possessing strength, courage, and fearlessness in the presence of the Lord. You can hear the bold confidence in verse 1. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?"
That's A.
Right. Now that theme perfectly mirrors the very last verse of the chapter, the A prime section in verse 14, which concludes with, "Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart."
Okay, so courage mirrors courage. Moving one layer deeper into the text of the B sections, in verse 4, we have our first star David seeking the beauty of the Lord. And if we scan down to the second to last section, verse 13, we find the exact philosophical counterpart, our third star David's belief that he will see the goodness of the Lord. The emotive beauty flawlessly mirrors the tangible goodness.
We push inward again to the C sections. Verses 5 and 6 detail David's confidence in being physically hidden and protected from the enemies that surround him. Moving inward from the bottom, verses 11 and 12 mirror this exactly, with David desperately pleading with God not to deliver him to his adversaries, and the false witnesses breathing out violence. Protection mirrors the plea for protection.
And then we reach the D sections, the innermost, most vulnerable layers right before the center point. Verse 7 consists of 3 rapid, positive petitions to God. "Hear, O Lord, have mercy, answer me." And that mirrors the intense anxiety of verses 9 and 10, which contain three desperate negative petitions. Do not hide your face. Do not turn your servant away. Do not leave me nor forsake me.
We have systematically peeled back every layer of this intricate poetic architecture. We have moved past the walls of the temple. We've walked past the bronze altars and the choirs. We have journeyed through the beauty, the rigorous truth, and the vindicating goodness. And now we arrive at the absolute center of the chiasm. The singular apex of the entire psalm, and arguably the climax of the entire massive sanctuary doctrine itself, is hidden right here in Psalm 27, verse 8. Listen to the raw intimacy of this realization. You have said, "Seek my face." My heart says to you, "Your face, Lord, do I seek."
Your face, Lord, do I seek. When you realize everything else was just a framework leading up to that one sentence, it completely reorients your entire understanding of religion.
It shatters the idea of religion as a mechanical process. Because the ultimate apex of the sanctuary message is not the sanctuary itself. The building is utterly beside the point. The intricate theological doctrine, the wheel and the spokes, the 2,300-day prophecies, none of it is the final destination.
It's just the vehicle.
The ultimate driving purpose of the sanctuary is the restoration of personal, intimate, unhindered, face-to-face communion with the God who inhabits the sanctuary.
So the entire unfathomably massive cosmic architecture, the millions of daily sacrifices over the centuries, the staggering wealth David poured into the blueprints, the incredibly complex investigative judgment occurring in heaven right now, all of this elaborate machinery exists for one singular beautiful purpose: to systematically remove the toxic barrier of sin so that the Creator can look at you and you can look at the Creator face to face without being destroyed.
That is the gospel in its purest form. Jesus is actively ministering in the heavenly sanctuary right this very second, and what is the primary goal of his mediation? He is continually beckoning believers. He's actively inviting you to bypass the outer courts, to enter the most holy place by faith. He is whispering the invitation of verse 8, "Seek my face daily." The sanctuary isn't just a fortified bunker to hide in when life gets hard. It is a magnificent cathedral of communion.
And understanding that reality changes how we wait for Him. If the ultimate goal is that intimate communion, then our posture in this life is clearly defined. Let's revisit the final concluding verse of the psalm, which takes on entirely new meaning now. Psalm 27, verse 14 commands, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord."
The English translation of wait does us a massive disservice here. In modern English, waiting implies a state of passive boredom. You wait in a sterile doctor's office reading a 5-year-old magazine, or you wait in miserable standstill traffic. It is an annoyance. But the ancient Hebrew word utilized here vibrates with an eager, electric, kinetic anticipation.
An active waiting.
It literally conveys the image of someone standing on their tiptoes, leaning their entire body weight forward, eyes wide, watching expectantly with unshakable hope. You are perched on the very edge of your seat, holding your breath, actively waiting for the full, unfiltered revelation of God to finally step out of the heavenly sanctuary and restore all things.
What a staggering, expansive journey we have taken today. We began in the dusty, claustrophobic caves of the Judean wilderness with a fugitive king who was consumed by one singular, unshakable obsession. We traced how that micro-obsession echoed through the centuries, evolving into the blueprints of the most magnificent architectural wonder on earth. We watched it expand into the ultimate cosmic hub of all biblical theology, a massive wheel that perfectly connects everything from the ancient rhythmic shofar blasts in the desert to the ongoing active heavenly ministry of Jesus Christ today.
It's all connected.
We thoroughly explored the triple stars of the sanctuary experience, how it reveals an overwhelming beauty that reclaims our hardened hearts, how it issues a call to investigate a truth that rigorously engages our skeptical minds, and how it provides a shield of goodness that legally and tangibly vindicates us when our lives are falling apart. And finally, through the brilliant folding chiastic poetry of David, we discovered that all of this complex machinery, all the gold, the incense, the intricate prophecies, and the dense doctrines, serves only one ultimate purpose: to lead us into an intimate, face-to-face communion with our Creator.
It is called the foundation of faith because it is the only structure strong enough to hold the weight of human existence. And as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to wrestle with, a concept that builds on everything we have unpacked today, but drops it directly into the reality of your Tuesday afternoon.
I love this.
If the ultimate driving goal of the sanctuary is unhindered communion with God, and if Jesus is actively ministering in the cosmic heavenly sanctuary right now to make that possible, I want you to seriously consider what the Apostle Paul meant when he later wrote to the chaotic church in Corinth, boldly declaring that your physical body is a temple of the Holy Spirit.
The ultimate micro-sanctuary.
If the massive cosmic heavenly sanctuary serves as the macro architecture of God's grace for the universe, how does that shocking reality make your very own life, your physical existence today, right now, a micro sanctuary? When your coworkers, your family, or strangers interact with you, are they encountering the triple star in your character? How will you actively reflect his dynamic beauty, his rigorous truth, and his vindicating goodness to the broken world around you? Because if the Holy Spirit actually resides within you, then you are carrying the profound, echoing reality of the sanctuary everywhere you step.
That is an incredibly beautiful and weighty challenge to carry with us. Thank you so much for joining us on this expansive deep dive into the true foundation of faith. We genuinely hope you walk away from this conversation, standing on your tiptoes, leaning forward, and eagerly anticipating His presence in your life. Keep rigorously seeking His face, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.